Hey everybody, week 9, here we are. We're zooming right through this. Now we're getting into We Agnostics, the first half of We Agnostics. We start on page 44. So if you're following along, get your book out, turn to page 44. We Agnostics, we're talking about God, religion, spirituality, and really this is where kind of the nuts and bolts begin of this whole program. And I actually share a little bit about my spiritual walk and how my spirituality has helped me in my sobriety. So I know you're going to love this. And as always, please share this with somebody that could benefit from it. And I will see you next week.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. Let's open this with a moment of silence, followed by the serenity prayer to center ourselves. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And we're getting into We Agnostics today. We're going to talk about God. And this is on page 44. And, you know, I saw an interview, or I read an interview, with Bill W., where he mentioned that he wrote this chapter. When he wrote this chapter, he did not write this chapter to teach us any particular religion. He did not write this chapter to advocate for any doctrine, any religious doctrine. He did not write this chapter to make us believe anything. He wrote this chapter so that we might question, we might wonder, and we might talk about God enough so that we would open the door just enough that God could get in and show us that he's real. And I paraphrase that, but it was something to that effect. The word agnostic means without knowledge. So the agnostic is the person that's without knowledge of God. Doesn't mean that it's not that he doesn't not believe in God. He just doesn't know. Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. The atheist is the one who says, no, there is no God. But that's not what this chapter will deal with the atheist. But most of us, we talk about, when it comes to agnostic, I had a belief in God all of my life. I was raised Catholic. I always believed in God. But I can look back now and see that when I came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, I was actually agnostic. I was without knowledge of how God had ever worked in my life. I had stood on my own 2 feet and run the show for as long as I could remember. I had never relied on the comfort of God. I'd never relied on the peace of God. I'd never turned anything over to God. I ran the show all my life, but I would tell you I believed in God, but I was without knowledge of how God had ever worked in my life. Today I can look back, and I'm no longer agnostic. Today I can see where God has worked in my life every step of the way. So we're starting on page 44, and we're going to get to it. We Agnostics. So also real quick, what this really deals with, this chapter, is the emotions, ideas, and attitudes that are going to change here. And that's towards God and God's universe. So in the preceding chapters, you have learned something about alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely because of the obsession, I can't quit entirely, I can quit for a little bit, but I always pick it up again. So if you find you cannot quit entirely because of the obsession, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take because of the allergy, and the previous chapters we've talked about the obsession and the allergy, and now we're done. We're not talking about alcohol anymore from this point out in this book. The rest of it's about a relationship with God from here on out. So that part of the book is over now. So if you have little control over the amount you take because of the allergy, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. And we explained last week what the spiritual experience is. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death, and that's step one, to understand that I'm doomed to an alcoholic death. That's step one. Or to live on a spiritual basis, and that's step two. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. That's the solution, the spiritual solution right there in step two. Step one is to be doomed to an alcoholic death. Or to live on a spiritual basis are not always easy alternatives to face. But it isn't so difficult. About half our original fellowship were of exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Or else what? We're going to die an alcoholic death. Now, I've said this before. There are no musts in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. You will hear that all the time, but there are a lot of musts in this book, and here is one of them. We must find a spiritual basis of life or else. Perhaps it is going to be that way with you. But cheer up, something like half of us thought we were atheist or agnostic. Our experience shows that you need not be disconcerted. So if that's how you feel right now and you're coming here and you believe in God like I did, but you just never saw and you couldn't imagine how God's going to help me here to be agnostic, or if you're that person who's, no, there is no God. Well, cheer up. That doesn't mean you can't have a spiritual experience. That's what it's telling me right here. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. And that's telling me, our human resources as marshaled by the will. So all my discipline, my knowledge, my brain power, my as marshaled by the will. I can bring out my willpower, and I can put everything that I have into not drinking. I can pray, I can read books, I can do everything that my will allows me to do, and it wasn't sufficient. This is important. I heard and I might have said this last week, I'm going to say it again. I heard a Catholic priest. There's plenty of men and women of God, Presbyterian, Catholic, whatever denomination, that are in Alcoholics Anonymous that could not get sober, yet they were men and women of God, but they couldn't stop drinking. And I heard this Catholic priest said, if I had come to Alcoholics Anonymous and you guys would have told me, I just need to let go and let God, he said, I would have said, fantastic. And I would have gone home, and with my hands at my side, I would have said, okay, God, I'm now ready to let you make me sober. He says I would have died drunk. I would have died a drunk, because God is not going to come down and do a fourth and fifth step for me. God's not going to come down and do an eighth and ninth step for me. I have to do that, right? So it doesn't matter how moral I am, how religious I am, if it's not bringing about the right spiritual experience. Lack of power. That was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. Obviously, but where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. It does not say which will help you solve your problem. It says a power greater than ourselves, which will solve your problem. God will solve your problem. That faith. And that's what this is telling me right here. And the rest of this program, this entire program, is about putting me in touch with that power greater than myself. That's what the rest of these steps are about, 2 through 12. It's about putting me in power and putting me in connection with that power and maintaining connection with that power and building that connection with that power. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And again, moral has to do with the right and wrong of human behavior. And it means, of course, that we're going to talk about God. Here, difficulty arises with agnostics Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hope rise as we discuss his alcoholic problems and explain our fellowship, but his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God, for we have reopened a subject which our man thought he had neatly evaded and entirely ignored. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him which someone had tried to impress upon them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought that faith and dependence upon a power great beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon the world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inexplicable calamity with deep skepticism. So we look at the world warring over religion, people saying they're religious and then fighting with each other, and inexplicable calamity, children dying, and how could a God be responsible for this? And we looked askance at many individuals who claimed to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it at all? And who could comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet in other moments, we found ourselves thinking, when enchanted by a starlit night, who then made all this? There was a feeling of awe and wonder, but it was fleeting and soon lost. And, we can go back to time when we were kids and we thought, who made all this? Where do I come from? It's always been that idea of something, at least for me, of something bigger than me. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. It says it right here. And whenever it says, it's going to use the word prejudice quite often here in this chapter, actually in this book. And wherever it says the word prejudice, all it means is old ideas. And I wrote that over the word prejudice throughout this book. So we found that as soon as we were able to lay aside old ideas, that's it, old ideas, and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach. And the approach means I'm making the approach to God. I'm seeking God. To make the approach and to effect a contact with him. As soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe, underlying the totality of things, we began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding. To those who earnestly seek, it is open, we believe, to all men. And so the first old idea that I had to set aside, the first prejudice that I had to set aside, was that I had to believe the way they told me to believe when I was a kid. I was born into Catholicism. And I came to Alcoholics Anonymous. My conception of God was that of a 9-year-old boy. I did not like it then. I didn't like it now. And I couldn't get past that. That's the first prejudice I had to lay aside, was that I don't have to believe that. It goes on. This whole thing, it says, is to find it's your own conception of God. And I've heard it said, I heard Joe and Charlie say it that I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. I've never had a problem with my own conception of anything. You tell me I can have my own conception of God? I'm on board. I can get on board with that. So I simply, at this point, and what this is telling me right here, when it says we found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him, right? It also says at the moment we we're able to lay aside our prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in God. So if you're the atheist, just a willingness that maybe. What that's telling me is that I just had to stop saying no, 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 and I had to start saying maybe. No, that's not going to work for me. No, I don't believe that. No, I had to just start saying, you know what, maybe. That's it. Just a willingness to change my mind. Just a willingness to say, I don't know. Let me just see if there's something to this. When, therefore, we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies, too, to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice, so do not let any old ideas you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. And if you think about it, that's what it is. Don't let any of these ideas that you have, any of the ideas that I had concerning God before I came in here, I had to just I had to say, you know what? I don't know. And I'm not going to let these old ideas that I have, keep me from getting this thing. Because that's all they were doing was blocking me. I was so obstinate. I was just, no. I'm not going to believe that. I don't want to believe that. God's not going to help me. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to affect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. Afterwards, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere, so we used our own conception, however limited it was. Our own conception of God, however limited it was. And my conception of God has changed over the years, and it's still very limited. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question. So one question we got to ask. Do I now believe, and that's for the agnostic, the one who said, I don't know, I have no knowledge. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe? So for the atheist, am I even willing to believe that there's a power greater than myself? So if I'm agnostic and I just don't know, do I now believe? And if I'm the agnostic saying no, or if I'm the atheist saying no, am I even willing to believe that there's power that there's a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe, the agnostic, or is willing to believe, for the atheist, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. So on this little cornerstone of willingness, I can build this spiritual structure. That was great news. That was great news to us, for we had assumed we could not make use of spiritual principles unless we accepted many things on faith which seemed difficult to believe. And that's what it was. I came in here and I thought, well, I can't make use of any of this stuff because I don't believe in the God of my childhood. I don't believe necessarily what they're teaching me in the Bible. I don't believe this. I don't believe that. And I wasn't willing to even think about it. Today I am. Today I seek God. Today I read the Bible. Today I go, that's where it's taken me. But in the beginning, that wasn't that way. I just had to become willing to say, you know what? Yeah, there's something more than me. When people presented us with spiritual approaches, how frequently did we all say, I wish I had what that man has. I'm sure it would work if I could only believe as he believes. But I cannot accept as surely true the many articles of faith which are so plain to him. So it was comforting to learn that we could commence at a simpler level. It's very comforting to learn that I don't have to believe what I see these people believing to start. I don't have to believe it all. It's my own conception of God. Besides a seeming inability to accept much on faith, we often found ourselves handicapped by obstinacy, sensitiveness, and unreasoning prejudice. Unreasoning old ideas. Many of us have been so touchy that even casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. So even casual reference of God made us, I don't want that. And it really is crazy because I come in here and I'm dying. I came in, I'm 46 years old and I'm dying of alcoholism, man. I can't control my life. I'm homeless. But then when you talk about God, I'm like, no. And I was so sure of my ideas and my beliefs. When the rest of my life and everything that I tried to run on self-will just crumbled to the ground. I absolutely burned it down. But when it comes to God, yeah, I know the answer here. I didn't know anything. So many of us have been so touchy that even the casual reference to spiritual things made us bristle with antagonism. This sort of thinking had to be abandoned. Though some of us resisted, we found no great difficulty in casting aside such feelings. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Sometimes this was a tedious process. We hope no one else will be prejudiced for as long as some of us were. So that's what it finally, the pain got great enough that I was willing to believe. Only God can help me. There has to be something here. I saw hundreds of people in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous who flat out state that God did for them what they couldn't do for themselves. And I had to believe that because there was nothing else for me to believe. There was nothing else. It wasn't nothing. No more drugs, no more alcohol. Nothing else could make that feeling go away. I wanted to just go kill myself. There has to be something else. So that's what it means when it said it was a great persuader. It beat me into submission. Faced with alcoholic destruction, we soon became as open-minded on spiritual matters as we had tried to be on other questions. In this respect, alcohol was a great persuader. It finally beat us into a state of reasonableness. Reasonableness. Because I wasn't being reasonable. I was what I know. It's my way. I know. Yet there I am, flat on my back. It's just like the man of God, the Catholic priest, the Presbyterian priest, whatever that I was just explaining that comes in. Well, I know God, but here I am, flat on my back, nevertheless. The reader may still ask why he should believe in a power greater than himself. We think there are good reasons. Let's have a look at some of them. The practical individual of today is a stickler for facts and results. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. And here's where it's good to point out that this book was written in 1939. We can forget that. We can't forget it here. It's going to remind us by some of the ideas and thoughts that they have here. Nevertheless, the 20th century readily accepts theories of all kinds, provided they are firmly grounded in fact. We have numerous theories, for example, about electricity. Electricity hadn't been around all that long when this book was written. Maybe 50 years, I don't know. Everybody believes them without a murmur of doubt. Why this ready acceptance? Simply because it is impossible to explain what we see, feel, direct, and use without a reasonable assumption as a starting point. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions for which there is good evidence but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. And we're going to get into an illustration here. I can look at something and it doesn't mean that's what it is. I look at, we'll get into it. We'll just read it. The prosaic steel girder. Prosaic steel girder, they're talking about a big piece of steel like what a building's built with, red steel, red bar, The prosaic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. These tiny bodies are governed by precise laws. And these laws hold true throughout the material world. Science tells us so. We have no reason to doubt it. Right? So what they're saying is that steel girder we look at, it's not really steel. That's electrons whirling around that make up this illusion that we're looking at. And we just believe that. I just believe it because I learned it in science class. Right? Visual proof. I have no visual proof of that. But science tells me that. And I believe it. Right? And it says, when, however, the perfectly logical assumption is suggested that underneath the material world and life as we see it, there is an all-powerful guiding creative intelligence, right there our perverse streak comes to the surface and we laboriously set out to convince ourselves it isn't so. We read wordy books and indulge in windy arguments thinking we believe this universe needs no God to explain it. Were our contentions true, it would follow that life originated out of nothing, means nothing, and proceeds nowhere. Instead of regarding ourselves as intelligent agents, spearheads of God's ever-advancing creation, We agnostics and atheists choose to believe that our human intelligence was the last word, the alpha and the omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of us, wasn't it? And so what they're saying here is there's all this precise and immutable law. The law of reproduction, the law of the biology. There's all this law. This has to happen for this to happen. Reproduction, the steel girder, the electrons, and I'm not a scientist, or whatever you call it, but it's all this immutable law in the universe, the law of relativity, all this stuff is this has to happen for this to happen. But it's all just an accident. Like there's nothing governing that. There's nothing writing that law. That's the argument that Bill's making here, is that does that seem rational to just say, no, that's impossible that there's a creator behind this? I'm not going to believe that at all, that there's a creator behind all this precise and immutable law, that it all is just an accident. That's a leap to make. And that's what this is telling us here. So we who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice, old ideas, even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of these various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have a logical idea of what life is all about. Actually, we used to have no reasonable conception whatever. We used to amuse ourselves by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when we might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness which we should have sought ourselves. That makes sense to me. I'm up drinking and doing cocaine at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning. No way I'm going to be at work on Monday. No way. I've been up for 3 days, and I'm scoffing at the family going to church at 8 o'clock on a Sunday morning. It was so ridiculous when I look back at it. Instead, we looked at the human defects of these people and sometimes used their shortcomings as a basis of wholesale condemnation. We look at the preacher who cheated on his wife, we look at the humanity of the human beings in these religions and use that to throw the God idea out, just cast it aside, because no, look at God's representatives over here. We talked of intolerance while we were intolerant ourselves. We missed the reality and the beauty of the forest because we were diverted by the ugliness of some of its trees. We never gave the spiritual side of life a fair hearing. In our personal stories, you will find a wide variation in the way each teller approaches and conceives of the power which is greater than himself. Whether we agree with a particular approach or conception seems to make little difference. Experience has taught us that these are matters about which, for our purpose, we need not be worried. They are questions for each individual to settle for himself. On one proposition, however, these men and women are strikingly agreed. Every one of them has gained access to and believes in a power greater than himself. This power has in each case accomplished the miraculous, the humanly impossible. As a celebrated American statesman put it, let's look at the record, and we're going to get to that next week. And so we're going to get more into, again, this isn't telling me what God is or what God isn't. It's just telling me that there's something more. There is a creator to all this. It says in the book multiple times, our creator. And, I had a very good friend of mine use this analogy, and I'm going to use it. I steal his stuff all the time. I got nothing original. But he said, I have a friend of mine in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and this might make some people irritated. I hope not, but anyways, he said, and he's a Christian. And he became a Christian. He got sober. He became a Christian 6 months after he got sober. Seeking God, he became Christian. Not because anybody told him he had to be a Christian, not because Alcoholics Anonymous says you have to believe anything. That was his journey that took him to Jesus Christ. And my friend went on and he said, he's been a Christian now for 15 years. If he walks out of the house and he gets hit by a truck tonight, gives up the ghost. That's it, steps out of the picture. And it turns out that he was wrong and it's nothing but dirt. Well, that's 15 years that he was able to be a good husband to his wife, 15 years that he was able to be a good father to his kids, 15 years that he was able to be a good son, a good friend on that belief. What difference does it make? On the endeavor that we are on, us alcoholics and drug addicts, what difference does it make? That's what I got for today. Let's open it up.